13 minutes to 6 o'clock. It's Drive, of course, and that was Drive, of course. And now let's check in with Sister Susie as she selects another winner from the drinks trolley as it hurtles past. What do we have tonight?
Well, I thought very refreshingly an Alpine style lager would be delicious.
Okay.
It's 4.5%, so not too strong. And it's a collaboration between Left-Handed Giant and Kingsmead St. Bottle and Palmer St. Bottle breweries, which are all very good breweries, so you should check them out.
Very good. A pint for Matt, please, and he'll have that between now and the end of the show.
Yeah.
Today's confession and another smart speaker is given out to Naughty Nobby. Naughty Nobby sends in today's confession. Simon, Matt, Susie, Holly and the learned jury of listeners. Every 6 months, my dear friends have a small reunion. In March's meeting, I played my first confession, which you called And on the Conveyor Belt Tonight, where my oversight led to Gobby Gary being revealed upon the toilet before a crowded Birmingham train.
Oh,
which
yes.
you might remember.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Success, I thought, and forgiveness all round. Several new listeners to Drive Time and subscriptions to your podcast. Very
nice.
good. The only grievance was my choice of confession, with the lads feeling we could collectively recall a better misadventure to disclose and seek absolution for. Between 2012 and 2015, up to a dozen of us would pack tents into our shambolic teenage cars and set out for an annual weekend trip to a popular Welsh seaside town to frolic with fellow students in the vibrant nightclub scene. During the day, we would go on adventures, and on one such year, it was my turn to choose our outing. I purchased passes for a Saturday morning water-based inflatable obstacle course at a nearby swimming pool with a leisure centre. This activity had been made popular throughout the 2010s through a TV programme called Wipeout with Richard Hammond and featuring the 4 big red balls.
Of
Do you
course,
remember that?
yeah, I do remember that.
Very big show. Wipeout, Richard Hammond. That's what was in our mind. The lads were extremely excited about this, with us agreeing to do it in fancy dress. The reward for the best participant's costume was being omitted from the purchase of any beverages for the entire weekend.
Wow.
As a result, we were all very secretive about our selection, with it becoming a highly competitive undertaking. Arriving Friday afternoon, we pitched our tents and headed into town. Like most nights at that seaside town, it's all a bit of a blur, but most of us awoke Saturday morning ready to tackle the inflatable jungle of obstacles. There were casualties who could not participate, I'm afraid, me included, having drink-related adversities which made any water-based activity perilous. Always drink responsibly, kids.
Yes.
Nonetheless, I would come along and mournfully watch from the viewing area. Half a dozen of us arrived, still concealing our costumes, and eagerly bustled into the changing rooms whilst I handed out the passes at reception. Dressing, my friends scored each other's costumes before heading to the pool. Silly Sam wore novelty underwear featuring an elephant's head and flaccid trunk. I will not describe this further to the show. He scored low with it being lazy and loutish. Righteous Richard was Bob the Builder with a yellow hard hat, inflatable hammer and denim shorts. He scored highly, earning second place. Big Bob was Tarzan in a leopard skin loincloth, bushy wig and headband. Dozy Dan finished third, dressed in full-body Minion costume from that movie franchise, but the clear winner was Gobby Gary, decorated as Tinkerbell with a green leotard, a small frilly dress, wings and a wand. Ecstatic with excitement, they entered the swimming area. Now, many of the acute jurors listening might have sussed that there was actually no inflatable obstacle course in that swimming pool. Up until the moment that you read these words, Father Simon, the lads still believe the humiliating events that followed were a simple scheduling mistake. But it was not, nor did I have any drink-related adversities. Naturally, I had no intention of partaking of my own prank, but as planned, watched it unfold from the comfort of the viewing area. 6 weeks before the incident, I was in the very same town, seeing my then Welsh girlfriend. It was her that suggested the inflatable obstacle course at the swimming pool, which was hugely popular with her peers. At that point, her grandmother proudly told me that her local pensioners' social association also used that leisure centre for one of their activities. And it was for that reason, with Olivia Newton-John's Let's Get Physical blaring out, that Bob the Builder, Tarzan, an elephant, a Minion and a Tinkerbell stood dumbfounded before the Pensioners' Social Association weekly aqua aerobics class. Ceasing their floundering and splashing, the old folks' laughter echoed throughout the leisure centre, drawing even more attention to the strange scene. Upon confirming with the instructor this was not the inflatable obstacle course, which was later that day, the lads skulked back to the changing rooms. Excuse me. I remember almost coming to actual harm, laughing so hard. Having every intention to admit my prank, seeing their furious leers upon meeting me back in the viewing area, fully dressed, I lied, claiming it must have been a mix-up and that I had been in the toilet, unable to warn them. As none of us had double-checked the time, we all blamed each other. The lads are hoping to seek forgiveness from all those who were exposed to what they believed was a farcical mishap. I do not, because I do humbly and sincerely seek forgiveness to aid my dear friend's ability to dismiss my transgression that day. As you speak, they may already be lighting up my phone to demand concessions, being new listeners and subscribers. Kindest regards, Naughty Nobby, who, well, that's a particularly, very, very good fade. A lot of big thumbs up for that one. A lot of people will have enjoyed the visuals, I think, for that one, but I think Naughty Nobby is destined for another smart speaker. Sister Susie, what do you say?
Yeah, Naughty Nobby. I think, it's funny, and I can imagine that those people turning up at the swimming pool looked ridiculous, and it would have been a lot of laughs all round. However, they, put a lot of effort and money into those costumes, and, the pensioners were there to exercise. And as funny as it was, I don't know, I don't like pranks, and for that reason, I can't forgive.
Brother Matthew.
Yes, I'm going to forgive. I've got a pretty strict regimen when it comes to fancy dress. In other words, I'm not in favour of fancy dress ever. So it was all their fault for wearing fancy dress, frankly. Also, they should have double-checked, shouldn't they? Should have known that it was not going to be the obstacle course at that particular time, because it was the pensioners' time with Olivia Newton-John. And so everything was and he got away with it for fine because he was up there in the gallery. So everyone else was wiped out and he wasn't, and for that reason I'm going to forgive. Okay,
this is Naughty Nobby's confession, and he'd like some forgiveness. Again. This is entirely down to you because it's the people's verdict. 61054, forgiveness for Naughty Nobby. However, just before the news, we had a confession. It was another confession from Naughty Nobby, which boiled down to the sentence, with Olivia Newton-John's Let's Get Physical blaring out, Bob the Builder, Tarzan, an elephant, a minion and Tinkerbell stood dumbfounded before the Pensioners Social Association weekly aqua aerobics class. The people's verdict is in.
So Steve in Brighton says, forgiven. Anybody that brings joy and laughter into the lives of pensioners is doing a good job. The lads will have forgotten everything after a few sherbets. Liam from Slough says Naughty Nobby is 100% forgiven. A lad's weekend away is not a lad's weekend away without pranks. Absolutely brilliant, and the images will stay in my head for a while. Still smiling to myself while typing this. And finally, Tony in Cheltenham says unforgiven. As someone who once fell victim to a fancy dress prank and turned up to a 50th birthday party dressed as Del Boy, long story, I know how they felt.
Okay, so thank you for the verdicts, thank you for the confessions. A whole batch came in over the weekend. If you have one, you can share it with us. If we use it, you get a smart speaker. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. And here we go with another well-oiled drinks trolley. What are we selecting from the trolley today, Suze?
Well, I've gone for a lovely orange wine, which I thought you might like. And it's orange because they keep the white grapes and they keep the skin contact for a little while. It turns them to orange. It's called Filthy Gorgeous. It uses the Mayo grape and it's from Catalonia in Spain. And it's delicious, very marmalade-y.
Excellent. That does sound precisely like my kind of thing, and Matt would just be a little bit sniffy about it.
Would I just?
I think you would.
Indeed.
Today's confession comes from Doris. Doris, thank you very much indeed. Names have been changed. Dear Father Simon, Brother Matt and Sister Susie, my mother was an avid fan of anything mystical. Palm readers, mediums, horoscopes, clairvoyance, you name it, she could not get enough of it. In 1966, she heard that a famous clairvoyant was coming to a nearby town. He was supposedly fresh from a stint in Las Vegas and was now gracing the UK with his presence. We paid the eye-watering sum of 15 shillings for tickets, 75p for younger listeners. This was about a third of my weekly wage.
Wow.
So this is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Wowzer.
We joined about 50 other eager patrons in a drafty little auditorium. My fiancé at the time was wide-eyed. All of this was entirely new to him. We endured a lady hammering out the classics on the piano, more enthusiasm than accuracy, and then a woman with pink candy floss hair began pacing the aisles, solemnly asking if we had a Bill, a Gerald, or perhaps a Percy in the room. She announced the presence of an older woman with a stick. Could it be your grandma? She was poorly before she passed.
Okay.
Standard
Well,
patter.
Yep.
To say we were losing the will to live would be generous. I was seriously regretting the investment when the star of the evening, let's call him Clinton, was introduced. Tall, robed entirely in black, he stood completely still as the audience hushed. In a slow, supposedly American accent, with just the faintest Glaswegian undertone.
Oh, really? Oh, this is going to be good. Come on.
I can't wait for this.
Oh, yes.
No, you're going to be
Yeah.
disappointed. He explained that his spirit guide, you'll see why an accent is not advisable.
All right.
He explained that his spirit guide, a Native American called Grey Cloud, would soon join us.
Got it.
Your
Yeah.
challenge, Father Simon. American
sorts of
Glaswegian undertone with a Native American
Yeah.
influence.
Yeah.
I think you're equal to it. Go ahead.
Clinton would enter a trance and Grey Cloud would speak through him,
Yes.
offering messages from the beyond. The lights dimmed until the room was pitch black, except for a single spotlight casting dramatic shadows on Clinton's face. He began to contort his features and speak in a cod American Indian accent that anyone who'd read the Beano in the 1960s would instantly recognize as Little Plum. I tried. I really, really tried. First a handkerchief went into my mouth, then my hand, but nothing could hold back the rising tide of hysteria. When he introduced Grey Cloud and twisted his face like a Madame Tussauds waxwork, I let out a high-pitched squeal. It was a startling sound even to me, and that did it. Someone at the back screamed. Another patron, panicking, made a dash for the exit, making a crescendo on the piano in the process. At that, all hell broke loose. Chairs scraped, feet stampeded, confusion reigned. Was that actually a sound from beyond the grave? A wail from the gates of hell? No, it was me, losing my dignity, says Doris. One of the first to flee was my fiancé, Brian, who later explained he was just trying to make sure people were safe. I don't think so. When the lights came back up, the scene was one of utter chaos. An ashen-faced elderly man on the stage, Clinton. My mother convulsed with laughter and pretending it was a coughing fit, and a scattering of bewildered patrons looking around as if waking from a collective fever dream. No sign of Grey Cloud. I have waited many years to ask for forgiveness, sometimes having a laugh at the absurdity of the scene. But I did not ask forgiveness from my mother. She loved the drama. Nor from my fiancé, he of the feet of clay. We married later that year and went on to share 50 years of laughter. I do ask forgiveness from Clinton, whose moment in the spotlight was somewhat eclipsed by my irresponsible laughing and provoking the mass hysteria of the evening. I fear I may have single-handedly ended the UK leg of his tour. Or at least the Sheffield gig.
Yeah.
Thanks for the great show. And that comes from Doris, who compliments the show, which is always a nice way to sign off if you're looking for a way to sign off when you're corresponding with us. I like the idea of this show in Sheffield. I like the sound of Clinton embodying the spirit of Glasgow, Las Vegas,
Yes.
and a Native American. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a very, very interesting idea. Sister Susie, what do you say to Doris?
Well, like I understand where Doris is coming from. I really do, and it does sound like quite a hysterical thing that maybe I would have found quite funny, and I can see where she's coming from. However, she didn't need to go, did she? Like, her mum was into this thing. A lot of people are, and she could have just dropped her mum off and therefore wouldn't have found it funny and wouldn't have created the hysteria. So for that reason, I don't think she should have gone, and I can't forgive her.
And it was very expensive. A lot of money that she
Yes.
spent on this, Brother
Yeah.
Matthew. What do you say?
Clinton didn't see that one coming, did he? Ironic. So, yes, I'm going to forgive because, well, I mean, almost wasn't going to forgive because...
Fortune teller.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the same thing? Well, who knows? Feels like it is now. Yes, no, I'm going to... We didn't get the accent, did we, of Grey Cloud, which was really...
wasn't scripted.
I mean, it feels like it should have brought it to life more if we'd had the Native American stroke Glaswegian. But we didn't. And Grey Cloud, and they all got the money's worth anyway, didn't they? So, for all those reasons, I'm going to forgive.
So every grey cloud has a silver
There
lining.
it is.
That could have been a career-ending accent from me, if you think about
Yes, it definitely would
No,
be.
I think well avoided. The People's Verdict, please, 61054. First word is Simon. The People's Verdict, please, for Doris. Just before the news at 6 o'clock, we had a confession, which I said was from Doris, who was going out with Brian, and they went to see Clinton, the clairvoyant, who was slightly Scottish, via Las Vegas, but who could become a Native American if he needed to, because
Yes.
that was the spirit voice. Anyway, it ended in chaos, and it was kind of Doris's fault. The People's Verdict, here it comes.
Not forgiven, says Helen in Wokingham. As soon as she started to get the giggles, she should have excused herself, and then it would never have escalated the way it did. But Gillian in West Lothian says, oh yes, please forgive Doris. I'm out on a walk around Livingston, giggling along to her, causing havoc. Absolute classic. And Michael on a family holiday in sunny Walcott says, not forgiven, simply because Simon bottled the accent. It wouldn't have been career-ending. It would have been award-winning.
If there had been one scripted by Doris, there
Would
might
you have gone for it?
Probably
No.
not. But there genuinely weren't any lines for Clinton / Grey Cloud.
Grey Cloud, yeah.
Anywhere in the script. You know, if there are those kind of details, then obviously we can tackle that.
Yes.
And if you have a confession, you send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. So it's confession time, but before we get there, we are entitled to some kind of refreshment. And that comes from our drinks trolley, courtesy of the woman in charge of the pub and the woman in charge of this show.
That's true.
That's
Whoa.
Sister Susie. What are you offering us today?
A very delicious non-alcoholic cider, Gallipet. I had one at the weekend. It was lovely.
It's still cider, though, and I think that's the issue. Apple juice
what's
is
the
nice.
issue?
Okay, I'll give it a go. What's it called again?
A Gallipet.
I think Matt's very interested in that
Yeah.
one. He'd like
Yeah, that sounds great.
a swift half.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Suze. No, it's a top piece of advice.
Pleasure.
Today's confession comes from Nono. N-O-N-N-O. No, I suppose. PG, maybe. Father
Oh.
Simon, Friar Matt, and Sister Susie. I write seeking absolution for a crime which at the time seemed so minor, but which has remained with me for the last few years as a small ache in my conscience. At the time of my misdemeanor, we lived in a small village of just a few hundred houses, neatly bisected by a railway line. We lived just south of the railway, where the largest part of the village was, with just a few cottages north of the railway. I was at the time a smoker, a sin, of course, but not the one for which I seek forgiveness. And as smoking indoors was widely frowned upon, I repaired to the doorstep one evening to have a fag. Obviously, don't try this at home. Whilst I stood there smoking, I witnessed a terrible thing. A cat had encountered a motorised vehicle and not survived to tell the tale. I went down the drive and picked it up, carefully moving it to the pavement opposite, but felt I couldn't just leave it there. I remembered our neighbours opposite saying that cats from the houses behind, just down the side road, used their garden as a shortcut, so I assumed that this cat could possibly have belonged to someone over there. I popped home and got a cardboard box and returned to respectfully put the cat in it. I resolved to find the owner of this poor creature, let's call him Tiddles, and set off down the side street. I picked a door and knocked, and when it was answered, I offered up the dead cat in a box, like a macabre Deliveroo.
Wowzer.
And I said, I don't suppose you know whose cat this is. The gentleman who'd answered muttered a bit and pointed to another house, so I set off to knock on that door. This continued for some time as I was sent from house to house by various neighbours who want nothing to do with me. Having knocked on a dozen or so doors with my unusual offering, and with the evening drawing in, I thought I'd have to give up. I'd been out over an hour and it was getting dark. The sky looked full of rain. An unnecessary fact, actually, as it turns out. I set off for home, but just before I got there, I thought I might just try a house or two north of the railway. So I crossed the level crossing and knocked at the first cottage I came to. Chap opened the door. I offered up Tiddles in his cardboard box and asked if he knew who might own him. He pointed across the road to the cottage opposite and said, He lives over there. It's Bernie and Linda's cat. That's who it is. Bernie and Linda's cat.
Bernie
That's
and
who
Linda.
it is. So you need to go and talk to them. I thanked him for his help and crossed the road. I knocked on the door, and both Bernie and Linda came to the door. Having explained myself, a tearful Linda confirmed that Tiddles was in fact Stan and was their cat. I offer my condolences and went home, because obviously Tiddles we'd made up, but Stan was the name of the
Stan
cat.
the cat, yeah.
I wish this was where my story ends, but not so. The very next morning, Bernie popped round to my house. He explained that Linda had been so upset by the loss of Stan that she had made him go out into the garden at 10:30 in the pouring rain to give Stan a proper burial. Bernie had obliged, digging a 2-foot deep hole in the sticky wet clay, and Stan was duly buried. They went to bed and spent a restless and upsetting night. So imagine Bernie's surprise when the next morning he awoke to find Stan sitting on the staircase, quietly washing himself. So Tiddles wasn't Stan after all. A happy ending for Bernie and Linda, and I confess he and I find the whole thing quite amusing. I wish this was where my story ends, but not so. A few days later, I was going to the village shop for some fuse wire, a first-class stamp and 2 pints of milk. Yes, it's one of those village shops. And I was arrested by the sight I saw in the window. I stood outside the shop looking at a poster which showed the remarkable image of Tiddles with the word missing in large print with some contact details below. At that moment, the shop door opened with a ping, and in stepped Bernie. He looked at me, looked at the poster, and then just held up his index finger to his lips. I took his inference, and for the last 5 years have said nothing. So now the time has come. I don't seek forgiveness from Bernie, whose cat Stan lives to this day. Nor do I seek forgiveness from the numerous people who were offered a dead cat on their doorstep, delivery style, as I'm sure any trauma was temporary and I was just trying to do the right thing. But I do seek forgiveness from the owners of Tiddles, who know nothing of his passing or his subsequent burial in the wrong garden. I hope the Compassionate Collective can forgive to ease the guilty throb of my conscience. I think the answer to that is going to be no, as far as Susie is concerned, because there must have been a way that you could have got a message to the owner of Tiddles, maybe. Anyway, let's see what Sister Susie makes of that.
Well, I was nearly there, because, you know, there was the persistence to do a good deed in taking the cat to the owner. So I kind of was on Nonna's side for a while, but like, there must have been a number. You don't just put a missing poster up without any way to contact them. And, you know, and maybe it was Bernie telling him to shush, but they could have just said, you know, I saw a cat, he looked like a cat, he wasn't, you know.
Could have left an anonymous message.
You could have.
Your cat is dead.
And a cat is dead and in someone else's garden. And they could have just gone through and persisted to do the good deed. And they didn't, and they fell short. And for that reason, I can't forgive.
Your owner is in cat heaven. It's in cat heaven. Everything is fine.
Why does he sound like
He's trying to disguise his voice.
Still on CB radio.
Yes.
Okay.
Brother Matthew.
I suppose he could have done that, couldn't he? But he'd already it felt to me like he'd already done more than enough. I mean, he'd put the dead cat in the box and gone around gone around the entire village, even north of the railway line.
You don't want to go north of the railway line.
Don't want to do
this
that
time?
on after dark. And still, and they didn't even recognise their own cat. They want to get it buried in the garden. They don't even know their own cat. So it feels like nobody comes out of this well, least of all the cat, who is, of course, dead. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, well, there we go. And the people's verdict is what we're after. A finely balanced decision may be. Does no get your forgiveness? 61054 on the text. First word is Simon. Just before the news, we had a confession from Nono, a story about Tiddles the dead cat, who was claimed by Bernie and Linda and said it was called Stan. Stan was then buried, but then Stan rose again. And it was like a resurrection story for Easter. That's what it was.
Or a different cat.
Or a completely different cat. And they never told the actual cat owners what had happened, because that's the way these stories go. People's verdict, here we go.
Alison in sunny Cornwall says, not forgiven. He should have rung the owners to put their minds at rest. But Becky in Weymouth says, good intentions from Nono. I'm laughing way more than I should be, and I appreciate that cat cat people may disagree, but I'm totally forgiving. And Simon from Hove says definitely forgiven, as he went to all that trouble. And if he'd contacted the rightful owners, he may have given them false hope that one day the cat would be coming back. It reminds me of when my dad buried my brother's cat, who turned up the next day. Heaven knows whose cat that was.
I think there are quite a few stories like this, actually, as it turns out. Your story, please. Thank you for the verdicts. Thank you for the confessions so far this week. Send yours to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.